Hi, and welcome back to Project Chana Power Hour. Each week we get together to learn and strengthen ourselves in our special mitzvahs of Kashrus, Shabbos, and Taras HaMishpacha, as well as other halachos that are pertinent to women. Our goal is to prepare ourselves and our homes to welcome Mashiach. Tonight's learning is dedicated to Ilui Nishmas Harav Yitzchak ben Harav Eliezer Tzvi Zev Alav Hashalom. May his neshama have an aliyah. If you would like to dedicate a class in honor or zchus of someone, please reach out via our email to projectchanapowerhour@gmail.com. Please join us afterwards for tzedakah tehillim and a Mashiach thought. Okay. For our first class on Hilchos Shabbos, we will be continuing part 9 of our series on Shabbos Davening, where we explore the meaning, Halachos, and Minhagim behind it with Rabbi Braun. Rabbi Braun is the Mara D'Asra of Crown Heights. Thank you so much for making time to be on our program.
Okay. So I'm very excited for tonight's shir. Baruch it's Pashgach Pratzos Matzah Chav Cheshvan, and it is right in the beginning of the shir in association with the birthday, today's the Rebbe Rashab's birthday, and there's an association with the Rebbe Rashab. We concluded last year with an interesting anecdote that if you notice, if you pay careful attention in your siddur, you'll notice that in the weekday davening, in the bracha of Moedim, we say HaToiv ki lo yichalu rachamecha, HaMerachem ki lo yisamu chasadecha. Hashem is good. Lo yichalu rachamecha, Hashem's compassion never finishes. HaMerachem, Hashem is compassionate. Ki lo yisamu chasadecha, His kindness always endures, never stops. The word Hamerachim in the Siddur is written exactly the way I said it, Hamerachim. But if you look at the Shabbos davening, it says V'Hamerachim. Now, some people don't pay attention and they say it out of habit, and they'll always say Hamerachim. They'll make that mistake, and I've heard quite a few people. There's an individual in Shul that always in his quiet Shemoneh says loud V'Hamerachim. You're not supposed to be saying Yisrael Shemoneh loud, but that's an interesting thing that I've always noticed in Shul, those kind of people. But we have this meaning that we say the same word, just let's change, V'Hamerachim. It's only in the Chabad Siddur. Interestingly, I'll point out another thing, that the very first Chabad Siddur, the first print, that what we believe today is the first print of the Alter Rebbe Siddur, it was only discovered a couple of years ago in Russia, and academics maintain most likely it was the first Alter Rebbe Siddur printed. Over there, we don't have that change. But in our standard Tilus Hashem, Torah Siddurim Dach, the regular standard Chabad Siddurim, we have that change, and that's what our Rabbeim taught us. On Shabbos we say, and Yom Tov we say V'Hamerachim. But there's no explanation provided. So what's this all about? If you open Sefer HaMinhagim, and Sefer HaMinhagim it says, in the name of the Frierdiker Rebbe, this is an instruction, a directive of the Frierdiker Rebbe, that the idea of Hamerachim, V'Hamerachim relates to whether you're going to be davening a Shemona Esrei. If it's a Shemona Esrei, meaning 18, or more accurately, 19 brachas nowadays. If it's a Shemona Esrei of 19 brachas, then we say Hamerachim. If it's a Shemona Esrei that only has like a Shabbos and Yom Tov type of davening, or Musaf Chalamoid, or Musaf Rosh Chodesh, any Shemona Esrei which doesn't have 18 brachas in it, 18, or more correctly, 19 brachas, then we say the words the word V'Hamerachim. Again, no explanation provided for that. So there happens to be a Sefer on Siddur, which is good to know about, of the Rebbe's great-grandfather, called Shar HaKoilel. The reason it's called Shar HaKoilel, because he explains particularly the Alter Rebbe's Nusach, and he explains that the Nusach of the Ari was a Shar HaKoilel. There are many gates to go into Shemaim, 12 gates for each Shevet. And if you know which Shevet, which tribe you are, your tefillahs go into Shemayim through your gate, and you have to daven the Nusach associated with your Shevet. The Arizal instituted that everybody should be davening this, since some people don't know which Shevet they belong to. The Arizal came up with a Shar HaKoilel, a general gate, and whether you know which Shevet, not Shevet, anybody could go through this gate. That's the idea of the Arizal's Nusach, and the Alter Rebbe's Siddur is based on the Nusach Arizal. So the Rebbe's great-grandfather wrote a Siddur, a Pirush on Siddur called Shar HaKoilel. That's actually the name of that Pirush. And in there he suggests a bunch of different explanations for things that are found only in the Alter Rebbe Siddur, or unique to the Alter Rebbe Siddur, or that are found sometimes in other Siddur Arizal. So he says that the Alter Rebbe was very particular that there should be 12 Vavs in the Bracha of Moedim. Vav means to add, so he wanted there should be, in Moedim we thank Hashem for a lot of different things. And he does the calculation, va'al nisecha, va'al niflesecha. I don't have the item in front of me right now. It should be a total of 12 vavs, and is a total of 6 brachas, 6 things that are called, it's supposed to be 12 vavs, and since on Shabbos, when in order to accommodate for the 18 brachas, we have 6 things that we thank Hashem, and we have 12 vavs, 6 plus 12 equals 18, so we have the aspect of 18 brachas in the Moedim. That's his own creation, his own invention that he suggested why the Alter wrote like that. I don't know where he got this from, but he was a Talmud Chacham and on his own right and in his own, and that's what he came up with. The theory is a great theory, but the Rebbe actually had an interesting minhag. The Rebbe changed actually in Sefer Minhagim. It says that whenever we don't say 18 brachas, 19 brachas, we say v'hamarachim. The Rebbe started doing so whenever we don't say tachnun. On the standard day when we don't say tachnun, we're having a regular weekday Shemana Esrei. The Rebbe slowly started introducing that change whenever the Rebbe davened for the Amud, and we know the Rebbe davened for the Amud after the Rebbetzin passed away. He also davened for the Amud the whole year after his mother passed away. But when the Rebbetzin passed away more recently, Tavshim Mem Ches, sometime during the year, the Rebbe started introducing this change, and people noticed it. That whenever the Rebbe when there's no Tachnan, the Rebbe says v'hamarachim. When there is Tachnan, it's hamarachim. The Rebbe did not explain. Nobody knows what, where, why. It's a slight change from what's in Sefer Minhagim. So we do have, I said it's connected to the Rebbe Rashab, we do have something interesting, that the Rebbe wrote a personal diary, the Rishimis, and in the Rebbe's personal diary, which was only discovered after Gimel Tammuz, in the Rebbe's room, he wrote that on the day of Beis Nissan, Tavshin Dalad, Beis Nissan is the yahrzeit of the Rebbe Rashab. The Rebbe writes in his diary that he writes different things that he heard from the Friedige Rebbe. That the Friedige Rebbe told me, my father, meaning the Rebbe Rashab, the Bali Maledes of Chav Cheshvan, told me that he tried to, when it was a yahrzeit, he tried to swallow a vav of v'hamarachim. People should have noticed that on a yahrzeit, if they have a yahrzeit, he says v'hamarachim instead of hamarachim. A yahrzeit day is special, even though the Chabad custom is that in a yahrzeit day we do say tachnun, but we also have in the Rebbe's Rishimis about how the Rebbeim said they would have preferred that we don't say tachnun, but the minhag is that we do say tachnun. And the reason why the minhag is we say tachnun on the yahrzeit because there's no better time to ask Hashem for what we need. But on the yahrzeit day, he would swallow in like quickly say this vav, no one should notice. And the Rebbe, the Friedige Rebbe, told the Rebbe that this is only something that's relevant to the Minhagim of our Rabbeim of the Nissim. The Rabbeim had this minhag on a yahrzeit. So that we know from the Rebbe Rashab and the Friedige Rebbe who told the Rebbe. Also only discovered recently. But the Rebbe himself, and the Rebbe did this publicly because the Rebbe did this for the Amud and it was very, very clear. Whenever there was no tachnan, the Rebbe said, v'hamarachim. No explanation provided. It could be. We know that a vav is to bring down a special hamshacha from above. V'hamarachim is an extra hamshacha of rachmim. And on a day like this, when there's no tachnan, the Rebbe wanted to bring down a special hamshacha. I'm no Rebbe, I can't explain. There was an elderly Yid in Crown Heights, from Zikna Anash, who had a lot of memories from Lubavitch, Rabbi Chitrik. He wrote a bunch of stories and anecdotes from Lubavitch and others called Rishimes Dvarim. And he suggested in his own explanation about this V'hamarachim, after introducing a question, why do we say Hatoiv ki lechalu rachamecha v'hamarachim ki lesama chasadecha? Actually, the grammar seems to be a bit awkward. Hamarachim is compassion. Why don't we say Hamarachim ki lo chalu rachamecha? Together with Hamarachim comes the word rachamecha. No, but instead Toiv comes with rachamecha, and Merachim comes with chasadecha. It's a bit confusing. So with a whole explanation based on a maimer of the Rebbe Rashab, again to connect with the Rebbe Rashab, and his point is, I'm not going to say the whole arichas. His point that he wants to suggest is that on Shabbos and Yom Tov, or maybe for that matter, it could be it happens on days when we don't say Tachan, there's a special Hamshacha coming directly from Toiv Be'etzim, which is higher than Yud Gimel Tzarachim, is coming down into the Hamarachim. A whole explanation, again, be that as it may, I'm just stating the facts, explanations we don't know, that the minhag is in the day when there's no Shemoneh Esrei, we say Hamarachim, and the Rebbe's minhag is, which many Chassidim have copied, that in a day when there's no Tachan to say Hamarachim. Let's move on to further in the Ma'ariv of Friday night. After Shtul Shemoneh Esrei of Ma'ariv, the silent Shemoneh Esrei, Tfilas Lachash, we say Vayichulu. Vayichulu Hashemayim V'aretz V'chol Tzvam, printed in the Siddur. The common custom is, a lot of people have this custom, that they don't make any interruption between finishing the Shemoneh Esrei and saying Vayichulu. There's no official source for this in Poskim. In fact, as we'll see later on, probably not tonight's shir, that in Shulchan Aruch it appears they're not supposed to be, it says they're not supposed to be talking during Vayichulu. Implication being that before Vayichulu is not a problem. The problem is if you talk while people are saying Vayichulu. But there's such a meaning. Suggested explanations for this meaning. I've observed this meaning when I was younger. By many elderly people. That's what stopped people from talking then. You shouldn't talk during Davening, but specifically making a hefsek between Shemoneh Esrei and Vayichulu. Generally, between Ma'ariv and Kaddish, which comes after Shemoneh Esrei, there's a Kaddish Eskal, but you're not supposed to make an interruption. Friday night specifically, there's a special thing because we know we're also not supposed to make an interruption between the silent Shemoneh Esrei and the Chazar Sashatz. After Shemoneh Esrei Vayichulu comes a bracha called Magin Avis, which is similar to a Chazar Sashatz, and maybe that was the reason they didn't want to interrupt them. So back to Vayichulu, the reason why the Gemara tells us if a person says Vayichulu Friday night, Hashem considers it as if you became a partner with him in creation. The word Vayichulu means they have finished. Vayichulu Hashemayim va'aretz v'chol tzulam, the heaven and the earth and all the hosts concluded on the sixth day. But the Gemara says, don't read the word Vayichulu, read Vayichalu, they have concluded. Who's the they? Hashem concluded. Because when you're saying Vayichulu, you're testifying that Hashem created the world, and you're talking about Hashem created the rest of the Shabbos, you're becoming part of it, you're also becoming a partner with Hashem. So there's this very special thing about saying the Vayichulu. Why do we say Vayichulu if we said already Vayichulu in Shemoneh Esrei? We said it in Shemoneh Esrei, we have the Psukim of Vayichulu. Because when Yom Tov falls out on Shabbos, it's a Yom Tov Shemoneh Esrei. In the Yom Tov Shemoneh Esrei, there's no Vayichulu. So we need to say Vayichulu is very important. So we need to say it after davening in order not to make any distinction between this Shabbos. We will say Vayichulu after Shemoneh Esrei. This one we won't say Vayichulu. That's the simple reason. So we just put a standard thing that's we always say Vayichulu after Shemoneh Esrei. On Yom Tov it's going to be your first time. On Shabbos it's going to be your second time. Also, there are people that are not capable of davening Shemoneh Esrei properly, and we want to be moitzi everyone. They should all have this. Exempt everyone who didn't hear the Vayichulu. So if the Chazan is going to say Vayichulu now, because the silent Shemoneh Esrei is not said loud, but after Shemoneh Esrei it's being said loud, it will exempt those who don't know how to say Vayichulu. But there are medrashim that are brought into the Rishonim that tell us that there's a special thing about saying 3 times Vayichulu. And if a person says 3 times Vayichulu, all their sins are atoned. The 3 times are going to be during Shtil Shemoneh Esrei, the silent Shemoneh Esrei, right after Shemoneh Esrei, the Vayichulu, and then again there's Vayichulu by Kiddush. So there's a special thing about 3 times Vayichulu. Now, this Vayichulu is said, the minhag is we say it, the whole entire crowd says it together, and we say it when we're standing. This is a form of testimony. We're testifying that Hashem created the world. Testimony in Bezdin has to be standing, v'amdu shnei anashim, so we're supposed to say it standing. The Chidas writes, he writes it specifically about Kiddush, but the same thing applies here also by this Vayichulu, that Eidim have to do tshuva. Before they testify, they have to do tshuva. So a Rasha, someone who's wicked, is postulated is not kosher to be an Eidah. Some people even tell witnesses by a get, some do it by Kedushin also. The witnesses, we tell them to do tshuva in order to be kosher Eidim. So because Vayichulu is a form of Eidos, before Kiddush, Vayichulu of Kiddush, and the same thing applies with this Vayichulu, one should be Mahar B'tshuva, think about repenting. The question is, what happens if somebody is davening alone? I said the meaning is the whole entire community says it together. But what happens if you're davening alone? The Mishnah Brura writes, if you're davening alone without a minyan, then you should find another person and say with him, Vayichulu. It's not only relevant for people davening without a minyan, there's people that daven ba'arichas. They daven and daven and daven, and the minyan is over already. The minyan is over, and the Vayichulu was already said, but Vayichulu is supposed to be testimony. Testimony, usually, Eidos needs 2 people. One person can't testify on his own. So there's some people have this meaning, they go looking around, trying to find a second person to say with him Vayichulu. That is not the common custom. The common custom is that we do say it standing, whether we're saying it davening alone or whether we're together with the tzibur. Either way, we say it standing, but we don't try to find another person. Now, that's based on Alter Rebbe and Magen Avraham that seem to hold that the concept of Eidos could apply also when you're davening on your own. A lot of Chabad Rabbanim have ruled this way, not like the Mishnah Brura, that there's no need to find another person. There were certain mashpiyim of Anash, elderly mashpiyim of the previous generation that always would find a second person, but that's not the accepted meaning. Some people even argue if you're going to find 2 people, it looks like you're trying to make an Eidos. You're trying to make an Eidos, maybe you'd have to have 10 people. Maybe if you're going to try to find another person to say it with you, that person is going to end up saying an extra time. It's going to be 4 times because it's supposed to be 3 times. But it's clear that it seems like the general custom was never this way to look for another person. It was because of the Mishnah Brura people started doing this. There might be a special hidden in doing so. at least you have the advantage of two. Others say no. It's either you're saying with the community together, as an Eid of Shlema, as a complete community, or you're saying on your own. But don't just try to find two. And like I said, clearly, according to Alter Rebbe, you don't have to have two. You could say it even if you're on your own. And the common custom is not to look for a second person. I'll mention just in passing that the Rebbe Rashab had a someone that was close to him and worked with him in the home, and he wrote a diary of the last few weeks of the Rebbe Rashab's life, and he was a big Talmud Chacham, and he argued that he's based on what he saw the Rebbe Rashab doing in the last weeks of his life. The Rebbe Rashab did. It seems like if he couldn't stand, he just wouldn't say Vaychulu altogether. I'm not sure if that's halacha 100%, but that was a suggested theory. Women say Vaychulu as well. Now, the argument why women shouldn't say, if it's a form of edus, of testimony, halach is that edus in Bezdin, they only accept men as witnesses, not women. So if a woman says it, maybe she should not say it as edus, she should say it as reading sections of the Torah, but that is not the minig. Even though women are not accepted as edus, the minig is a woman say vaychulu too, and they don't, the particular edus that Hashem created heaven and earth is not an edus in Bezdin, and that edus can be said by men and women equally. If a person did not say Vaychulu in Shul, he forgot to say it, Vaychulu in Davening, then Poskim say that when it comes to Kiddush, make sure you stand for that Vaychulu. Now, our meaning is that Kiddush B'chlal is said standing. At least Friday night, Shabbos and Yom Tov night, we say Kiddush standing, but there are people that say Kiddush sitting. So the Poskim say, even if you say Kiddush sitting, the Vaychulu, if you didn't say the first time in Shul, you didn't say it standing then, in Davening, then say it now standing. After Vaychulu comes another section called Birchas Me'ein Sheva. Chazal made a takana institution that after Shemoneh Esrei is finished, the Chazal Shemoneh Esrei, the Chazal should say one bracha, and in this bracha he should say a summary of all the 7 brachas of Shemoneh Esrei. It's a shortened version of Shemoneh Esrei. It starts off with the word Magen Avis Bidvarim, Mechayim Mesim B'Mamarim. Magen Avis corresponds to Magen Avram. Mechayim Mesim B'Mamarim corresponds to bracha of Mechayim Mesim. Hakel HaKadosh Ein Kamayu corresponds to HaMelech HaKadosh, and indeed, if it's Shabbos Shuvah, we say HaMelech HaKadosh, or if it's Chana falls on Shabbos, or Yom Kippur on Shabbos. HaMiniach LaMimiyim Shabbos Kachi is the middle bracha of the Tzeidah Menuchaseinu. Lefanov Navid Be'irav Afachad will serve Hashem with fear and awe represents the Tzei. It's about serving Hashem, let's say. Noida L'shmoy is Moidim. Adonai Shalom is a bracha of Sim Shalom. So we sort of summarized all the brachas. The reason why we have this bracha here, now normally by night in Shul, the Chazan doesn't do a repetition of the Amidah. There's no Chazaras Hashatz for Maidiv, only for Shachas and Mincha. Friday night, we don't have a repetition, but we have a semi-repetition. The Chazan says this bracha. The reason for this bracha, it starts with Baruch Atah Hashem, is because the shuls used to be in the fields. In the fields, there were mazikim, whether in the literal sense or demons. And during the week, a lot of people didn't come to shul. They finished work and they came home, and they'd have ma'anev at home. Friday night, people come to shul, and people come late, and some people might stay in shul extra time, and they'll be alone, and it's dangerous to go back. So they made a extended davening, so nobody should be left alone in shul. They added this new chazar, semi chazar sashatz called the bracha of Birchas Me'ein Sheva. So like this, you'll be able to finish your Shemoneh Esrei even if you came late, and you'll have something to walk home with. And therefore, the bracha of Me'ein Sheva is a bracha only for the chazan. It's not a bracha for the tzibur, but it says in the Siddur, Baruch Atah Hashem Elokeinu Melech Yisrael Elokeinu Avram Kitzchak Piyanka V'Keil HaGadol, even though the Keil and Kedush Ma'amad, that bracha should not be said by the Yachid. If the Yachid wants to say it, don't say the beginning of the bracha, the Baruch Atah Hashem, don't say the end of the bracha. It shouldn't be a bracha of Atala. And indeed, our minig is that we say, it's a bracha of the whole things for the chazan, but we say the middle section from Magen Avis till the word Zeichel HaMayis HaBreishis, the Yechidim, not only the Shliach Tzibur, the Chazan, everybody says it along. And if somebody wants to say it at home, that's also perfectly fine. You could say that. It's not a bracha, as long as you don't say the beginning of Baruch Atah Hashem and the end of the Baruch section. This is Friday night. What about Yom Tov that falls out of Shabbos? We also say a bracha because it's Shabbos, but we don't mention Yom Tov in this bracha, because this bracha, normally whenever we daven Yom Tov davening, we throw in the Yom HaShabbos there. Here, when we're going to say the bracha Me'ein Sheva, we're not going to mention that it's also Yom Tov, because this is not a bracha that's being said for Shabbos because it's Shabbos. It's a bracha that's being said for the mazikin, to protect the people that are staying late in shul. Yom Tov night, people didn't come a lot to shul as they came on. Interesting, as they came on Shabbos, people were busy. Yom Tov, you're allowed to cook. People were busy with cooking and all of that. With less audience in the shul, it was a particular Friday night issue, and therefore we mentioned it only Friday night. If Friday night is on Shabbos, so we'll say it, but it has nothing to do with Shabbos or Yom Tov. Different. We have Ne'ilah. Yom Kippur falls on our Shabbos and Ne'ilah. When we say it's Ne'ilah, we throw in Shabbos. Now we throw in Shabbos, even though there was never Ne'ilah on Shabbos, because once it's this day every tefillah of this day you have to mention Shabbos, and every tefillah. But the bracha of Me'ein Sheva is not a bracha connected with Shabbos; it's a bracha connected with Mazikin, so you don't have to mention anything extra in that bracha. Here comes a interesting thing, but we'll leave it mitzvah for next week. There is a whole controversy that came out during COVID when people had these private porch minyanim. Which places are appropriate to say the bracha of Bein Sheva? If you have a minyan outside of a shul, it might not necessarily be appropriate to say the bracha of Bein Sheva. We'll leave that mitzvah for next week.
Thank you very much, Rabbi Braun. And for our next class, we are excited to continue our series on the Halachos of Mechitza, Part 3, with Rabbi Tuvia Kasimov. Rabbi Kasimov is a Rav in Crown Heights, and we are grateful to have him on our program.
Thank you very much. As Hashem, we're going to be discussing the third shir, the halachos of a mechitza, which is very, very important. Mirz Hashem, very, very important halachos. And we already discussed last week and the week before that many important yesodis of what exactly a mechitza is, when you need a mechitza, why you need a mechitza, the halachos of having a mechitza by a shul specifically. As we mentioned last week, that a shul has a special din. It's a mikdash ma'at, and we have to set up the shul in a way that it's a malkum kaddish, that it should not be prone to anything which is the hepech, the opposite of kedusha. It has to be done in the best possible way. Then we started discussing also last week very, very important dinim of when one is required to have a mechitza, because we had a general statement. The Gemara tells us that taruva any mixture of people is not permitted. It's also. So what exactly does that mean? How do you quantify that? So that we started speaking about last week, which is extremely important. What exactly is the Hagdara? So just on one foot to bring us back onto the same page. The Hagdara is on one foot, obviously not just limited to this. There are a few nuances in the Paskim, but anything which everybody is be'etzim separate, they're not together. They did not gather to be together. They did not gather as a joint effort, as a joint event, whatever it is. Everyone be'etzim is by themselves. Then the Paskim write that this is not included in the chiyuv of mechitza. The examples that we discussed were that seemingly, if we're worried about haruvais, you should have a mechitza in every single Jewish community. On the streets, there should be a mechitza, technically, right? According to if we say that taruvas is not permitted. So the answer is that no, it's not required, because ultimately everybody's going on their own personal way, and there is no connection, there is no interaction between the parties. Therefore, there is no obligation to have a mechitza. That's the main thing. The main thing is is it a joint meeting, is it a joint gathering or not? And the same examples that we brought also when it came to going to the grocery store. It's a place where people are going, and obviously there's going to be males and females in the grocery store in close proximity. But since one has absolutely nothing to do with the other, this individual is going to do their groceries, the other individual is going to do their groceries. There's no joint action or joint gathering, so the Paskim write that it's not a requirement. Going to a library, as we mentioned last week, is also a very, very important discussion. So technically, a library, if you're just going in and out to pick new svarim, to return old svarim, whatever it is, then it's okay. Technically speaking, if one is sitting by an area where you're able to read, so as long as everybody is separated, meaning to say there's no mixing, everyone sitting by their own spot, by their own table, that would be permitted. Some do write that there is room to be machmer, to have a designated separate area for men and for women. So that akel lefia inyan, you have to see every single area and to decide accordingly. Okay, so we left off the discussion of having a meal, having a seudah, Sheva brachas. We're going to discuss Mir Hashem a little bit later towards the end of the year. But we discussed about having the requirement of having a mechitza in an area where it's a cheder eichel. If it's a place, it's a lunchroom, right? So anywhere where it's a lunchroom, a cafeteria, or if it's a restaurant. So as long as everybody's eating by themselves, everyone has their own spot, their own table. It's for them, their family, the guests, whoever they came with. And there's no real mixing, there's no real interaction, there's no socializing between the parties. Everyone's there for their own thing. Then the halacha is that a mechitza would not be required. Another reason brought down in the Pasuk is because it's only a kibbutz akroi. It's not really a kibbutz. You're not really gathering there for the sake of gathering. You're sitting there in order to be able to eat, and then you go on your way. You do not continue schmoozing or interacting with others. You're in and you're out. You're in, you eat, you interact with your own personal guests, the people that you came with, and then you leave. So that is why you see that what's nohag by many, many places is there is no mechitza by restaurants, and that is the reason behind it. What happens? This is the famous question that a lot of people always have. What do you do? What do you not do? What happens if it's a dinner? It's a fundraising dinner. It's an event. It's a community event. So this is the famous question, because technically, right? Yes, it's true. I came to eat, and maybe I'm on my own, but ultimately I didn't come to eat by myself. I came especially to a communal event. That's a whole different story, right? There's a kibbutz of people that got together, that joined together in order to whatever, for a fundraising event or for an event of chizuk, whatever it may be. The question is there a chiyuv to have a mechitza or not? So this is something which is discussed in the Paskim, and the Paskim write there's one mehalach in the Paskim, as long as there's a separation, a designated separation between the men's section and the women's section, meaning to say there's a hafrada, there's not necessarily a full-fledged mechitza. According to one approach in the Paskim, this is acceptable. This is an acceptable practice. So people are coming, they're going for the dinner, they're watching whatever it may be. So as long as it's clearly designated separate seating, then according to some Paskim that is okay. The question then becomes, what happens by a simchas nesuyin or sheva brachas? With sheva brachas, we're going to speak a little bit more about. There's more pratim that we need to discuss. By chasana, technically, according to what we just said, one can go ahead and say, by a chasana, you don't need to have a mechitza. We're not even talking about dancing. Dancing is manchas shmei. Certainly, by dancing, a mechitza is required. But here, just on the focus of the meal, the seudah itself. Technically, based on what we said, quoting the Pesachim that are discussing dinners and other events, seemingly there's more reason to be mekel when it comes to a chasana. So the answer is no. The Pesachim do make a clear distinction between a dinner, an event, versus a chasana, and it's very, very simple. When it comes to a chasana, it's a place of, it's a kibbutz, it's a makom of simcha. And there's more chashash of kalus reish, there's more chashash of heilulus, there's more of a concern that something improper may take place. So therefore, even though technically we do find leniencies for a fundraising dinner, an event, v'chulu, but we cannot apply the same svaras, we cannot apply the same logic and the same leniencies when it comes to an actual simcha. Simcha is definitely much more room for concern, and the Pasuk write very, very clearly that it is a problem. A mechitza would be required. Now, I do want to say that although we did say that me'ikra din, there are some Pasuk which permit to have by a regular dinner, a fundraising dinner, whatever it is, just separation as opposed to a full-fledged mechitza. Together with that, I do want to mention that it's very, very important to mention that even so, the minhag chassidus, the way it's brought down to the Paskim, is that there should be a mechitza kedin. So it's very, very important that even though technically maybe me'ikra din, there is room to be lenient. However, the minhag chassidus is definitely it's very important to be makbid on the mechitza, because ultimately, it's a more relaxed event. There's food, there's probably music in the background, and sometimes there can, especially if it's a seudah which has wine, you have to be even more careful. So it's very, very important. This is not just something which is a message for individuals, but it's also very important for the Rashi Kehillos, those who are running. Kehillos, those who are running Meistais, that it's important to set up the system healthy Melachatchila. Right? So even though technically you could maybe get away, so to speak, by a dinner, you could have a few shittas to rely on. The question is this really something that you want to do? As we mentioned the first year, this is something that nobody ever is going to be over on a serious avera overnight. Everything starts off slowly. And there's letters from the Rebbe about this, there's minus from the Rebbe about this, that you have to stop any potential pirtzes before there's any afshadis for them to happen. So somebody who's you're able to see, and we can bring all the Mamari Chazal, that we always have to look in the future, what could happen from this? Or is there going to be any immediate effects, or is there only going to be effects down the road? Whatever it is, whatever it may be, we have to always be careful and always be vigilant to make sure that the kehillas are run properly according to the way that the Rebbe would want it, as we're going to be seeing now, hopefully today, the Rebbe's shita about giving shirei Torah with mechitzas in shirei Torah. The Rebbe was very makbid. We'll see exactly what the Rebbe has to say on this point. So it's very, very important. I cannot stress enough the importance that even though technically one may think that cutting corners it's easier, v'chulu, it's going to turn people off. People are not going to come to the dinner. First of all, that you should know that the Eibishter runs the world. We know this, but we have to remind ourselves sometimes that even though there could be some certain pressure v'chulu, but ultimately, if it's a dinner to fundraise, you need the siyata d'shmaya. A person needs the help of Hashem to be successful. And the true bracha of having the help, the siyata d'shmaya, for a person to truly be successful, is definitely going in the way of Torah mitzvahs. It's not a stiran adarabba. We go l'chatchila riba, we go the way that the Torah tells us to go. There's absolutely no question, there's absolutely no doubt that it will be successful. And whatever pu'ulas need to happen, it will definitely take place. And we just have to stand strong and not to allow things which are not proper into our kehillas. And even though technically there could be room for leniency, but this is not necessarily the standard which Chassidim should be holding by, because the Poskim clearly write that minhag chassidus is certainly to have mechitzas even by a dinner, even by such an event, notwithstanding the fact that even though there are those who are matir, but nevertheless, even on that, it is still the appropriate and the correct thing to do to have a full-fledged mechitza in such a case. So let's discuss now the next point of having a mechitza by a shir. A shirei Torah, people are learning, they're coming together for the drasha, you're having a communal shir. The Rav of Kehillah, the Shliach in the Kehillah, or the Maggid Shir in the Kehillah, whatever it is coming to give a share for the community, or you're having a guest speaker to come give a share. Are you obligated to put up mechitzas in such a case, or not? So we find in the Gemara tells us, we see clearly from the Gemara, that any time that there were communal members that gathered together, anashim v'nashim, to hear a drasha, to hear a shir Torah, a drasha, whatever it may be. And the Gemara tells us that we find from the Gemara that there's an obligation to have the men sitting separately and having the women sitting separately in a way that they're not going to mix. So definitely hafrada is an absolute must. That's for sure. So the question is, from the Gemara, how do we take it? Do we say that it's enough just to have a afrada, or do we also need to have a mechitza which would actually create a separation or not? So that's the question. So there are those that write that just having a separation would suffice, based on the Gemara, seemingly that would suffice. However, there are those who are machmer that they learn pshat a little bit differently. They say the pshat is a little bit different, and they say that even though technically you could maybe learn out, you could derive that you don't need a mechitza and afrada suffices, nevertheless they are shaylo, they negate this way of learning, and they prove that no, that really there's a chiyuv to have a mechitza, and this obligation of having a mechitza is really me'ikr hadin. It's a strict halachic requirement, and it's not just a nice thing to do. It's not just a hiddur, it's not just a chumrah. They actually write that there is a full-fledged obligation to have a mechitza. So again, we do have two opinions on this, and I do want to mention that even those that say that me'ikr hadin it's not required, even that opinion is going to tell you that memili de chasidosa and the gather of tznius, it is absolutely the correct thing to put a mechitza. So according to both opinions, really a mechitza should be placed. According to one, that it's mamish halacha, it's not just a hiddur, and according to the other opinion, it's a hiddur to put a mechitza. Good. The question is, some people may taina, let's be practical. You have a Chabad house, and you have young students, and to have a mechitza, especially in today's liberal world, you got to wake up and smell the coffee, as they say. To be matzrich a mechitza under such circumstances, you got to be dreaming. Is there any room to be lenient? Let's say to bring back Yidden to Yiddishkeit. Is there any tzad to be makel not to have a mechitza? So it's a very important question, and this is the reality. The reality is you have campus shluchim, you have people who are literally dealing with people who are. It's a mazel they even came. They're holding by Rachmana litzlan into marriage. They're holding by. It's a very, 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 very dire matziv. It's a very, very serious situation of assimilation. Is there any room to be lenient in such a case? So Baruch Hashem, we have a Rebbe. Baruch Hashem, we have a Rebbe that addresses this. The Rebbe wrote the famous letter to Yidden in Russia, and the Nekundas Hadavar, obviously, it's of what the Rebbe wrote. We have to be very, very careful not to take things out of context and not to make new policies of leniency. Everybody has to have their own Meida Hira that they ask their shaylas to, their own mashpia who they consult with. It's very important that we don't take things into our own hands, but I will mention it's a letter from the Rebbe. We should definitely mention it. But the practical application of when yes and when not, this is something which everybody needs to discuss with their own Meida Hira and with their own mashpia. This is not for the purpose of paskening. This is for the purpose of general information and general knowledge. The Rebbe wrote in a letter that in a case, definitely the Rebbe was machmer, by the way, to always have a mechitza. There's no question about that. Chalila v'chalila, we're not saying that the Rebbe's shit was the opposite. We should not just be taking a letter from the Rebbe and saying, the Rebbe's shit is to be mekel. So I want to preface that the Rebbe's shit was absolutely to have a mechitza, no question about it, even by a shir Torah. It's very important to preface with. But b'neisav lezeh, the Rebbe did write that in the case of a malkum tzorech gadol, that if in a situation a mechitza is going to be put, and through putting the mechitza, you're going to have many who are not going to come. Shelo yavayu mishtatfim rabim, many are not going to attend. Point number one. Point number two, these who are not attending, there's a chashash that those yidden are going to go completely away from the derech of Torah or mitzvahs. Ad kedei, so much so that Rachmana litzlan, they're going to come to intermarriage, and only one of the only ways to save them is through a shir Torah. The Rebbe was lenient on condition that there should be a separation. So actually, I think from this letter you see punkt verkehrt. You see how the Rebbe was so careful about a mechitza, and so careful about separation, because the Rebbe gave so many conditions. You're going to lose out a lot of people. Those people that you're going to lose, the loss is going to be to the point where it's going to lead to Rahman al intermarriage, which again, I do believe that the Rebbe's letter was not just written to Russia, to the Matzav. Then I'm on the ground. I understand. I hear from the shluchim on campus. I hear from the shluchim in these very, very, very highly intermarried communities. I know firsthand how dire the situation is. It's not a question. Many shluchim are telling me it's not a question of finding a yid with a Jewish father and mother. Today, in many places, it's a question of finding somebody with a Jewish mother. The rate of intermarriage of Rahman al is so dire that we have to act to save as many neshamas as we could. So there is this letter of the Rebbe, and I strongly believe that definitely it would apply in many cases in America. That's just the reality. But exactly how to apply it, when to apply it, this I don't want to say in the public share. This is something which needs to have consultation case by case. But I do want to point out that even with such a letter, how careful the Rebbe was with the din of having a Mechitza. That number one, the Rebbe gave all of these conditions. And number two, the Rebbe wrote that even in such a case, it's only the Tanai that they are sitting separately. It cannot be mixed seating. So this is a very, very important point that we must take note of as well. And once again, the practical application of this is going to be case by case, and everyone needs to consult with their own Pesach, their own Meirah on this. And Emir Tzashem, hopefully last week we'll have the next, I apologize, next week we're going to have the last segment. Thank you very much, and Hatzlacha Rabba Umufloga.
Thank you very much, Rabbi Kasimov. And for our next class on Kashrus, we are excited to begin a new series, Egg Ed. Most of us use eggs in our cooking and baking on a daily basis, and we think you'll find this series informative and practical. We're grateful to have Rabbi Nissan Zibell back with us tonight. Rabbi Zibell is the Kashrus administrator at the RCF, the Rabbinate of Central Florida, and delivers classes to the general public on various Kashrus topics. He is also highly active in answering consumers' Kashrus questions on a daily basis. Thank you very much for being part of our program tonight.
Thank you very much for having me, and a good evening. We're starting a new topic, Egg Ed Part 1, and as mentioned in the introduction, eggs are something that we use very commonly throughout our day in various ways, whether it's cooked or in omelets, or if it's in cookies or in cakes, or just to egg a bread to make it shiny. So it's a very practical food, and it's something we want to have clarity on and make sure that we know how to navigate the kashrus when it comes to eggs. So just a few things which we'll discuss today. Let's first of all do eggs need a hashgacha. And are eggs from other birds acceptable, like ducks or quails or the like? Can one buy special heirloom eggs from a roadside stand? Can one tell if an egg is kosher just by looking at its shape? And hopefully we'll be able to cover all this, and everyone will have clarity on that. So we are taught that hayetz min hatamei is tamei, something that comes out from an animal which is tamei, which is unfit, which is not kosher. The product is that product as well is not kosher. So therefore, an egg that comes out of a non-kosher bird would be non-kosher. When it comes to honey from bees, even though it comes from bees and bees are not kosher, it's a whole discussion for itself. Just it's addressed, and it's not for now. So based on that, before one buys eggs, they need to know it's coming from a kosher bird. That's first of all. Besides for that, one needs to be familiar what is a kosher bird. The Torah doesn't give us clear signs as to which birds are considered kosher. When it comes to general animals in general, the Torah is very definitive. What fins and scales and chews its cud and split hooves. But for a bird, the Torah just lists which birds are not kosher. A list of 24 birds that are not kosher. But which birds are kosher is a discussion, and we'll discuss that momentarily. Just to mention one point, we know that a treifa, a chicken, which got an injury or a sickness that causes it to be a treifa, which it can't properly live afterwards, there's a very halachic definition for that, is not kosher. One cannot eat it. This would also affect its eggs. The eggs coming from the chicken would also become not kosher. So one may ask, how do you know? Maybe the eggs coming from is a treifa, and therefore there's not a kosher egg. So we are taught that since majority of chickens are not treifas, you could assume your egg is coming from the majority and therefore wouldn't be an issue. However, if you know a specific chicken is a treifa and it laid eggs, then in such a case, a person would not be allowed to consume that egg. So now, to defining what's a kosher bird, we're not going to get into too much detail because it's a topic for itself. Birds and knowing which birds are kosher, and we gave a whole series on this that can be found on kashrusbeintheknow.com. Poultry precautions, discussing a whole class over there, discussing the how to tell which bird is a kosher bird or not. But very briefly, to mention that, like we mentioned, the Torah says 24 birds are not kosher, and the Gemara discussed that the Torah listed the shorter list, meaning there's a lot more birds that are kosher. And the Gemara gives different signs to know how to tell if a bird's kosher, and we're not going to get into all those details. But ultimately, practically speaking, at the end of the day, after all the different signs that are mentioned, the Ramah and Shulchan Aruch, which is what Ashkenazim follow, rules that at the end of the day, one needs to have a Mesorah, a passed down tradition from generation to generation before eating a bird. And if a bird does not have a Mesorah, does not have a specific tradition passed down from generation to generation, even if it has all the qualifications that the Gemara mentioned, it would not be considered acceptable as kosher. And that's what Ashkenazim follows. Sephardim have a little bit more they rely a little bit more on the signs of the Gemara, but for Ashkenazim, you have to have a Mesorah, a passed down tradition from generation to generation, that this specific bird is kosher. So when it comes to even something like a chicken, there are many, many different species of chickens. Some of them look pretty similar to the classic chicken, whatever the classic chicken is that we are used to having Mesorah on. But many of them can look very differently in the makeup of their body, the types of their feathers, in their color of the flesh, even the chickens that have black flesh, the color of their eggs. There are so many different characteristics, as well as their behavior. Some of them could be a little bit more aggressive and more predatory. So even within chickens, what people call chickens, there can be things that are different, and the Mesorah does not pass on to those birds. Even the Gemara mentions many times there are different communities that thought that this type of tarnagulta, this type of chicken, was fine until they noticed that it's not. There was many times mistakes even within chickens, because within chickens, not all chickens across the board are a kosher chicken. Now, just to mention briefly, there are various ways how strict one needs to be, how similar the chicken needs to look like the chicken that we have the Mesorah on. And there's a letter from the Rebbe Marash, which the Rebbe Marash seems to take a little bit more of a lenient approach. Nevertheless, the Rebbe Marash over there mentions that if it's generally accepted that this bird is not acceptable, then one should follow that, what's generally accepted. But if there's no general consensus on a specific bird, one at times could be a little bit more lenient in considering a certain bird having a Mesorah if it's very similar to what we generally have Mesorah to. But again, more details on that is for a separate discussion, discussing more details of the chickens and birds in general. So back to here. So first of all, you have to know your chicken has a Mesorah. So how does one know? If you're buying classic eggs from the store, regular white or brown eggs, traditionally, it's always been that the eggs that are bred for giving eggs, and the chickens that are best for eggs, are usually the kosher ones, or majority of the time are the ones that we have a Mesorah on, and therefore one can buy commercial eggs or just professionally produced eggs that look like regular chicken eggs, white or brown, from anywhere, and don't have to be concerned that they are not coming from a non-kosher species of chicken. However, if one is presented heirloom eggs or eggs that look a bit different, the eggs are blue or green or pink, which these types of eggs do exist, and sometimes they're sold if it's on a roadside, or if it's at a farmer's market, or if it's somebody who's decided to start having chickens and wants to make interesting eggs, then it gets a lot more tricky that this could be coming from a chicken that does not have Masorah, and then the eggs as well would not be acceptable. So one needs to give extra attention when the eggs look a bit different and don't have the regular appearance. And if it's coming from a person who's not from, or lahavdil is coming from a guy, then you can't trust them, even if they say this is coming from a chicken, this and this chicken. Because the moment the eggs look a little bit different, we can't trust them anymore for what they're saying, that this is coming from a chicken that they're maybe a Masorah on. And at that point, one would not be able to eat it. However, if it looks like a regular chicken egg, and they're telling you it's a chicken egg, you could assume it's coming from a kosher species, and one does not have to be concerned. Now, it's become more and more the habit of people to have chickens and have their own eggs. It started maybe with COVID, and later on different chicken flus, different shortages of eggs. And because of that, many people started growing their own chickens. And at times, people don't realize they want to have interesting eggs. They want to change things up, and they start getting different species. And before you know it, you may be having species which are not from the Masorah, not something that we have passed down tradition to be a kosher chicken. And chickens being from not from the Masorah is something that pops up as well many times in the Kashrus world. Over 20-something years ago, there suddenly was a question about a certain very famous breed called the Leghorn chicken that was used for laying eggs, and some Rabbanim were saying that it's not kosher chicken, the way it positions its feet on the perch, and there was a whole discussion until the Rabbanim ultimately decided that it was fine. And then later on, maybe 15 plus years ago, there was a whole discussion about something called the Brackle chicken, that in Eretz Yisrael they found a chicken that would be the perfect chicken for meat production, and ultimately Rabbi Landau and other Rabbanim said that this chicken is absolutely not kosher. There's no Masorah. It has certain unique characteristics that are different, and therefore it cannot be used. So this is something that happens all the time as well in the Kashrus world. Now, there are not many Rabbanim out there which are experts in the Masorah, especially the Masorah with time, that we're not anymore. It used to be everyone grew up with chickens, and everyone had chickens in their backyard, so everyone knew what chickens looked like, and they were familiar with it, and it was passed down from generation to generation. Right now, these days, chickens are only in the slaughterhouse, and a few people may have chickens, but that tradition was slowly withered, and it doesn't really exist much. The only people that were able to pass on the tradition were shachtim, or older shachtim from the previous generation, especially by the Ashkenazi shachtim, ones that were unfortunate, that were Baruch Hashem, that were saved and were not killed by the Nazis in Machshemam, and survived, and were able to pass down to the next generation what was eaten in the Haim in the Europe, and which birds did have a tradition, and based on that is the little Masorah that we have today. And Hashgachas like the OU tried to have a database, and the OU has a very helpful Rav Rabbi Loiki, which is an expert, one of the world experts in birds and Masorah. And if anybody ever has a question, they can email Rabbi Loiki or reach out to him by phone at the OU, and he'd be happy to help. So just to know, there is a way to define it, and there is a way to get to the bottom of it. But just to know that there is, it's not just across the board. Just because it's a chicken doesn't mean automatically that it's fine. And the same thing when it comes to ducks. If it's just a regular white traditional duck eggs, those are assumed coming from a kosher duck. Those are usually the ones that are bred for eggs and are grown for eggs. However, if it's something a bit unique, a bit different, then it could be coming from a duck that's questionable. And there's different ducks that there's questions if it's considered ducks that we have in Masera. Some say ducks with a black beak are not considered something with Masera and not kosher. Some have issues with other ducks. So, but if it's just a regular white duck egg, usually it's considered assumed as kosher. When it comes to quail eggs, which now is becoming more and more common for people to be consuming quail eggs, it depends on the quail. There are different types of quail, and we'll show some visuals to discuss the different types of quail, just to show a little bit, and to explain a bit on which ones could be fine, which ones would be an issue. So, just to review some images. So when it comes to quail, we have here. So we have here the Coturnix quail, and there's actually two types of Coturnix tail. Here we have one of them. There's one that's called a Coturnix japonica, and there's another one called a regular Coturnix. So this quail is one that there is a Messiah, has been passed down from the previous generation, and their eggs do have unique splotches, and the way their eggs look like are a bit unique, and you'll find many times with the OU such quail eggs. There are other quails. One of them is called the button quail, which is sometimes grown more for pets. Their eggs as well are colored, but the blotches on there are a bit different, and one could tell that they're not the same as the Coturnix quail. And then there's the bob whitetail, which is totally white eggs, and the button quail and the bob white don't have a Messiah, and therefore both their eggs would not be acceptable. These bob white quail eggs are very small and would not ever be confused with chicken eggs. One doesn't have to be worried. There's also something called the scaled quail and the Gambel's quail as well, which do not have a Messiah. There are some hashgachas like the KLBD, the London Basin, which hold that today we have no Messiah at all for any quail, and say one should avoid all quail eggs. So one should discuss with their Rav what approach to take if they should follow the Messiah that there is from some Rabbanim, or let's say at the OU, for certain quail eggs, or if they should not follow this altogether. There's a Rabbi Loiki likes to share a story that he was once somebody reached out to him from Lakewood, New Jersey, where obviously a lot of frum Jews that care very much about halacha and kashrus. And somebody was just wondering, because they noticed that there was a certain supermarket, Jewish supermarket, that was selling like special heirloom eggs, or eggs that were considered free range, very healthy, and coming from a farm, had all these types of advantages, organic, and something very special, unique eggs. And many people were pretty excited about these eggs, and they actually they tasted even better than regular eggs, and they were a different experience, and there was a big hype about it. One person bought it, and he realized this egg looks a bit different. It had a little bit more of a thicker shell. The shell was a bit more of a different makeup. It was a bit smaller than an egg, and some of them were spotted. They hadn't seen chicken eggs, and they had heard that there could be a problem with eggs if it's not coming from the right chicken. And they had called her by Loiki, and he actually went down and took some samples. And after just looking at the eggs right away, he realized it's definitely not a chicken egg. This was actually something called guinea fowl. It's a type of bird that produces eggs. It could be similar to chicken eggs, but the bird doesn't look anything like a chicken. And for whatever reason, these were being sold in a kosher store as chicken eggs, when really were guinea fowl, which guinea fowl, there is no Messiah for that. And technically, for Ashkenazim, would not be kosher. So this just shows that sometimes things can even creep up from stores, kosher stores, and just with lack of proper education, one could easily get confused. I'll just share some pictures of guinea fowl and the eggs, just for educational purposes, so one could see what it looks like. So you have a picture here of a guinea fowl with some eggs next to it. There's some guinea fowl eggs. If you look closely, you can see they're spotted. Not always are they spotted. At times they are not. But one of their characteristics is they are spotted. But they are, they could look like a brown chicken egg. But in truth, they are not. And they're just a guinea fowl egg. And to look in comparison, you have here a chicken egg, or you have a duck egg, a chicken egg, and a guinea fowl egg. It's actually a little smaller, and like mentioned, the shell looks a little bit different, and other characteristics could make it point out. But if someone is not educated, they could just think it's a healthier type of chicken egg and could be totally acceptable. So before starting anything discussing eggs, we first need to know, is it coming from a kosher bird? Is it coming from a bird that we have a tradition that is kosher, which is required for Ashkenazim to know? Otherwise, we cannot even consume this egg. We'll stop here for today. And thank you very much for having me.
Thank you very much, Rabbi Zibell. Okay, and now we're going to put a coin in the pushka, and we're going to say the Rebbe's capital together, as well as capital Chaf for Eretz Yisrael. Shir Hamalais LeDavid, Lolei Adonai Shehaya Lanu, Yaimer Na Yisrael. Lolei Adonai Shehaya Lanu, Bakum Aleinu Adam. Azai Chayim Bala'unu, Bacharais Apam Banu. Azai Hamayim Shetafunu, Nachla Avar Al Nafshenu. Azai Avar Al Nafshenu, Hamayim Hazei Baruch Adonai Shalayna Sananu Teref Lishinehem. Nafshenu Kitzipa Nimlata, Mipach Yoikshem Hapach Nishbar, Va'anachnu Nimlatnu. Ezreinu B'Shem Adonai, Aise Shamayim Va'aretz. Now we'll say together capital Chaf for continued safety in Eretz Yisrael. Lamnatseach Mizmar LeDavid. Yancha Adonai b'yayim tzara, Yesagev Hashem Elohei Yaakov. Yishlach ezocha mikaydesh umitzion yisadeka. Yizkar kol min chaysecha, va'ailascha yadashne sela. Yiten lacha chilvavecha, v'chal atzascha yamale. Nuranana bishuasecha, v'shem Eloheinu nidgal, yamale Adonai kol mishalaysecha. Ata yadati ki haishi Adonai Mashiachai, Yanehu mishmei kadshai, b'gvorais yeshai yaminai. Ele varechev ve'ele vasusim, va'anachnu b'shem Adonai Eloheinu nazkir. Hei makaru v'nafalu, va'anachnu kamnu v'nisaydad. Adonai haishia, hamelech ya'anenu, v'yayim karenu. Mashiach thought for today, Parshas Chayesara, Tavshin and Beis. The Frierdiker Rebbe notes that the word lahavi in Kol Yimei Chayecha lahavi l'moisa Mashiach, translated as to include, in a Chachamim statement, all the days of your life, to include the days of Mashiach, also has the meaning to bring. So the statement can be interpreted to mean all the days of your life should be directed to bringing the days of Mashiach. This is the purpose of every dimension of our Avodah. Quick reminders. If you appreciate these classes, share them with your family and friends. All playbacks are available on mikveh.org Power Hour and also on all podcast platforms as well as 24/6. Search us up as Project Chana Power Hour. If you have questions on the classes or would like to dedicate a week of learning in honor or le'ulei nishma someone, please reach out to us on our email, projectchanapowerhour@gmail.com. May our learning prepare us and our homes and bring every Jew home to Eretz Yisrael with Mashiach now. Thank you for joining.